streets of Cologne were slick with rain, the downpour hammering against the cobblestone roads, pooling into twisting streams that slithered through the alleys. The air was thick with dampness, laced with the scent of moss clinging to the ancient stone walls. Now and then, a bolt of lightning tore through the sky, briefly illuminating the city's silhouette before the darkness swallowed it whole once more. I pulled my coat tighter around me, exhaling a slow breath, and stood beneath the looming shadow of Cologne Cathedral. My gaze lifted toward the towering belfry, its spire vanishing into the storm clouds above. This wasn't the first time I had heard the stories. The clock tower on stormy nights, the hanging silhouette, the vanished recordings. Tales whispered through the streets of Cologne like an old wound that refused to heal. But this time, I wasn't just another bystander. I clutched a letter in my hand, no signature, no return address. Just a single line scrawled across the page. Stormy night. Watch the tower. A simple invitation, yet utterly irresistible. And so here I stood, braving the cold, the storm, and an unshakable sense of dread pressing against my ribs, unsure if it was the chill of the night or something unseen lurking in the dark. Then, a flash of lightning. And for the briefest second, I saw it. Perched at the very peak of the bell tower, barely visible against the raging storm, was a shadow. It swayed unnaturally, as if suspended by an invisible rope, a body dangling lifelessly against the sky. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the next clap of thunder plunged the world back into darkness. And the figure was gone. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I swallowed hard and raised my camera, training the lens on the belfry. My fingers trembled as I pressed the shutter. The mechanical click of the camera echoed unnaturally through the rain-drenched air. I glanced at the screen. Nothing. The clock tower was empty. No shadow. No movement. Had I imagined it? Was it just an illusion, a trick of the storm and the flashing lights? I clenched the camera in my icy fingers, my mind racing between logic and something far less explainable. Steeling myself, I took a slow step forward and pushed open the cathedral's heavy doors. The scent of old stone and candle wax rushed to meet me. I had barely stepped inside when a sudden gust of cold wind howled through the entrance. The doors slammed shut behind me. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the cavernous hallways. My breath hitched. Something wasn't right. I turned slowly toward the entrance. The latch had fallen into place by itself, locking me inside. Then, from the cracks in the ancient walls, I heard it. A sound. Low. Hoarse. A whisper seeping through the stone itself. I held my breath. The voice was not mine. And I was no longer alone. The storm had raged through the night, and by morning, the entire city seemed freshly washed clean, the air thick with dampness, carrying the crisp bite of rain-soaked stone. Back at the newspaper office, I buried myself in old records, sifting through Cologne Cathedral's history, searching for any trace of the shadow I had seen. Most official records were mundane, uneventful. Until I found one forgotten article in a yellow newspaper. A name. Jakob Steiner. The headline read, "The Jakob Steiner Incident." Jakob Steiner, once a clergyman of the cathedral, had been accused of blasphemy at the end of the 19th century. He was secretly executed. His body had been hung from the bell tower for 3 days. The article was brief, almost an afterthought, as if it was never meant to be read. I searched for more, police records, church archives, but everything about the case was missing. Erased. What had Jakob done to deserve such a violent fate? Who had condemned him? And more importantly, was his soul still trapped in the bell tower? The unanswered questions sat heavy in my chest as I made my decision. At dusk, I returned to the cathedral. This time, I wasn't waiting for a storm. This time, I went in. The cathedral was dimly lit, its flickering candles barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. The air was damp, stagnant, heavy with the scent of mildew and time. Wooden pews stretched out in silent, orderly rows, as if no one had moved them in centuries. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing against the cold stone. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt it. The entrance to the bell tower was tucked behind the altar. A dark wooden door, its surface rusted with old iron reinforcements, stood firmly shut. I pressed my hand against it. It didn't budge, as if it had been sealed shut for a reason. I exhaled, turning away to search for another way in. Click. The sound of a lock shifting. I froze. The door had just unlocked itself. A wave of icy air slithered through the opening, carrying the scent of wet stone, rot, and something else, something old. I stared at the black spiral staircase beyond the doorway. My pulse quickened, my throat drying, but some invisible pull urged me forward. I stepped inside. The stairs were narrow and steep, each step creaking faintly under my weight. I brushed my fingers along the stone wall as I climbed, its surface rough and cold, sending unease crawling beneath my skin. Then, I heard them. Whispers. Faint. Numerous. Not one voice, but many. They seeped from the very walls, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand, yet their desperation was unmistakable. A chorus of trapped souls, echoing within the stone. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I forced myself higher and higher, until at last, I stepped onto the bell tower's wooden floor. The space was dim, beams of moonlight cutting through the open archways. Wooden support beams stretched across the ceiling, creaking softly in the wind. And in the very center, a shadow swayed gently in the air. Suspended from a fraying rope, its neck bruised and twisted, the rope's fibers digging deep into decayed flesh. A body. Jakob Steiner. His hollow eyes stared straight ahead, unseeing, yet. As I stood there, frozen, he moved. His head twitched. Then, with a slow, agonizing motion, he turned to look at me. I stood frozen, my breath turning shallow, my chest tightening under the crushing weight of fear. The figure swayed ever so slightly, suspended by the fraying noose around his neck. His skin, pale, withered, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, clung to his skeletal frame. And his eyes. No, not eyes. Just two empty sockets, deep and hollow, yet somehow still seeing. He turned slowly in the air, and with each agonizing rotation, those sightless voids locked onto me again. Then, the bells tolled. A deep, resonant chime that shook the air itself, reverberating through the stone walls, through my very bones. It was not just a bell. There were whispers beneath it. At first, they were barely audible, a murmuring just beneath the surface of the sound, like wind seeping through the cracks in an ancient tomb. But as the chimes echoed, the whispers grew louder. Closer. They were wrong. They were wrong. I wasn't meant to die. The voices overlapped, merging, multiplying, hundreds of them, all pleading, accusing, mourning, a chorus of souls trapped within the tower's walls. Dark cracks began to crawl across the stone like veins of decay, spilling out an eerie, cold mist. The air itself felt heavier, saturated with something unseen yet undeniable. I took a step back, and the wooden floor beneath me groaned. No, not just the floor. Something inside it. A shifting, a crawling, like the wood was alive, something slithering within its structure. Then, I looked down. Footprints. Not mine. A trail of wet, dark imprints stretching from the shadowed corner of the belfry, stopping directly behind me. Cold sweat slid down my spine. Something was right there. Close enough to touch me. Then, I felt it. An icy breath against my ear. A voice, brittle, rasping, slipping through the cracks of the air itself. Help me. The shadow convulsed violently, its broken body thrashing against the noose, the rope digging deep into its twisted, contorted neck. It was happening again, a death without end, a punishment without mercy. Jacob was trapped in this tower, reliving his final moments over and over, condemned by the lies of those who had buried the truth. And now, the whispers told me what the records had not. These voices weren't just his. They were all of them, souls sealed away in time, voices strangled by history, ghosts left to rot in silence. And I was the only one left to hear them. My trembling fingers brushed against the papers tucked inside my coat. The letter. Jacob's final confession, the one I had stolen from the church archives. In it, he had written the truth. He had been innocent. The true sinner had been the cardinal, a man who had wielded faith as a weapon to bury his own sins, casting Jacob as the scapegoat. I stared at the shadow, realization settling in. He wasn't trying to kill me. He was pleading for help. The bells tolled faster, more frantic, not a call to prayer, but a warning. The whispers surged into a howling frenzy, clawing at the very walls, black fissures spreading like festering wounds across the stone. Something unseen was trying to escape, and I could feel its pull, dragging me toward the depths of this cursed tower, trying to pull me into its cycle. I had only one choice. Expose the truth, or be swallowed by the curse. With every ounce of strength left in me, I tore open the letter's seal and began reading aloud. Each word fell like a hammer blow, shaking the walls, splintering the wood, the tower itself groaning in agony. The shadows on the stone writhed, a chorus of suffering souls twisting and convulsing. I saw Jacob's face shift, his mouth opening as if to speak, but only ragged, choking breaths escaped. The air grew lighter, the choking frost beginning to fade. And then, the doors of the tower burst open. A gust of wind howled through the chamber, ripping the papers from my hands, sending them flying like scattered ashes. I stumbled, nearly losing my footing, before turning and running down the stairs, through the empty cathedral, out into the city streets. The moment my foot touched the pavement, the bells stopped. The world fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The next morning, I published Jacob's story. His name, his truth, exposed to all of Cologne. By nightfall, I sat at my desk, staring at the last water-stained page of his letter, the words smeared, the ink bleeding like old wounds. Outside, the sky was dark and endless, a yawning abyss of shadow. And then, the lights flickered. The clock on the wall chimed, though no one had touched it. I inhaled sharply, my pulse slowing to a crawl. And as I lifted my head toward the window, a figure was there. A hanging shadow, suspended against the night, staring silently into my room. Then, in a voice like rotting wood and dying embers, he spoke. "I am Jacob's cardinal."